November 19th, 2025. We're in the fourth year, and it's day 269 of the war in Ukraine. A warm welcome, I greet you, to the Daily Situation Report. Above all, as always, I welcome the Algo crew and all channel members. The next evacuation vehicles were able to be co-financed by our amazing community. Ukraine for Berlin has linked a post about this on X. And thanks everyone from the community who always participated in all our donation campaigns. And surely, everyone who doesn't die miserably from the consequences of this war will also be grateful to you, because one of the vehicles we donated saved them. Thank you very much at this point also from me personally. The former training battalion of the International Legion of the Ukrainian Ground Forces has officially been converted into a fully fledged international training center. The unit was formed in 2023 after the Kharkiv offensive and has since trained foreign recruits who were then distributed among 3 line battalions. Recently, many volunteers from South America, mainly Colombia and Brazil, have joined. You can probably imagine for yourself which organizations that are very interested in getting well-trained and battle-experienced fighters. Contrary to circulating rumors about the dissolution of the Legion, due to a lack of applicants, the formation has now been reestablished under the name 157th International Training Center of the Land Forces and received its own new insignia. It's a green and yellow chevron with a stylized Spartan helmet. Officially, it is still undecided whether the center will train exclusively for the International Legion in the future, or more broadly for other land forces units. The restructuring comes at a time when there have been observations that the 2nd International Legion under the 16th Army Corps, also called the Kharkiv Corps, is being deployed. In the Kupiansk sector, it remains brutal, and the fighting is still intense. It's dynamic, even if the situation map shows few changes. Ukrainian forces were able to retake ground in these 2 areas, slow down the Russian advance a bit, and stabilize parts of the line. The focus is on short counterattacks by drone hunters and on advanced Russian groups and precise artillery to close breaches. The situation remains uncertain. There's very little information over Kupiansk. It is possible that the Russians were able to advance a bit further here as well, somewhere along this main road here, in order to reach this road here. It could also be that they managed to cross the body of water somewhere around here. Ukrainian soldiers were spotted here recently. I did not see that. Assuming that they made it across the eastern embankment and that the main part of the fighting is still taking place here. But it's similar to Pokrovsk here. We now know Ukrainians have regained control of these 2 points, which were previously held by Russia, because the Russians tried to capture these 2 roads here, and thus cut off the Ukrainians' logistical connection. Both sides are still fighting with strong aerial reconnaissance. The losses are still high, and the territorial gains on both sides are quite small. The situation is still fluid. Pressure has slowed, but not stopped. As you can see, not much is changing on the situation map. But if we take a look at a video from the scene, we can get an impression of the fighting away from the situation map. As fighting persists, Russia again hit a residential building in Territorial with a cruise missile, killing 26 civilians, including children. By the way, these in the front are flares, decoys, that the cruise missile drops at intervals so that the air defense has trouble shooting it down. And here it flies into the residential building, which is typical for a Russian airstrike. On the other hand, the Ukrainians really hit a high-value target, making another hole in the thermal power plant. It was hit again now and is one of the largest thermal power plants in the central energy system of Russia, which will have a major impact on the surrounding areas. And this here is a Ukrainian light mobile anti-aircraft unit. We see shoulder-launched anti-aircraft in the form of a Chinese FN-6 man-pads, which is quite cheap and generally suitable for low-flying, slow targets such as a helicopter. The Ukrainians mainly use it for drone defense. Behind that, you can see a soldier with a heavy FN M2 Browning machine gun from the United States of America. They also use it for drone defense. In general, this is a mobile drone defense unit and not meant for larger targets. Shade drones are targeted here because they're slow, loud, easy to see, and have a large surface area. You don't need Gepards or costly systems to fight drones if they're large, visible, and flying low. But they managed to shoot down not just a drone, but also a cruise missile, and they captured the whole thing on video here. Near Tureck, Russians captured about 80% of Shverpimfka located here. This area remains under Ukrainian control. The rest is no longer. There was also another territorial gain here in the northwest of Tureck. Now they are preparing to reach the body of water here to close it off and push the Ukrainians out completely in order to close and straighten the front again. I'm actually very surprised that the Russians were never able to close the pocket here, and that the Ukrainians pushed them out rather than being encircled. However, the Ukrainians also needed this small bottleneck to avoid being cut off. Look at this mother. A prisoner of war from the Russian side, like many others, is recorded by the Ukrainians as he is allowed to make his free call to his family. He says that the Russians treated them like dirt, didn't pay them, and also threw them into the meat grinder as cannon fodder. But his mother doesn't seem to care about that, and she's also not really happy that he's still alive and on top of that in captivity. When he asked her if she wasn't happy at all to hear from him, and if she even cared that he had been taken captive, instead of dying, she just said, "Yeah, so what am I supposed to do now? How can I even help you?" And he just said, "At least talk to me. This is my only chance to talk to the family. Maybe even the last one. Does she know?" But she insists that she's angry now because she wrote to him several times and he didn't reply. At this point, I have to pause for a moment. With exactly these kinds of calls, I have often had the feeling that many of the relatives really think that their children, brothers, or fathers are not in a war, but are at some kind of paid summer camp, where you can more or less do whatever you want, like responding to calls from your mother, for example. And now another remark from the Ukrainian side, and I think that's why he also has this free call. There, especially in resistance legions like the Freedom of Russia Legion or the Russian Volunteer Corps, you are interrogated and asked if you want to keep fighting for them, or if you want to go back to Russia in the next prisoner exchange. Of course, they also put some pressure on them and make the consequences clear to them. Of course, on the Russian side, you were always treated badly anyway, and now you're being treated in the European Union. And they also say, yes, it will continue to be that way if you join them. Of course, they also use a psychological effect to remind them of all the bad things they've experienced, and offers them the chance to fight for them and be treated better in return. It's clear that if they become prisoners of war and are then exchanged, Russia will send them back to the front shortly after, and they probably won't survive it a second time. But in the end, everyone has the final free choice they can make there, whether you switch sides or go back, and probably won't be so lucky next time. So let's continue. Because here he says that he doesn't want to go back to Russia and will continue fighting on the side of Ukraine. And that's when his mother becomes alert for the first time and asks him if he's out of his mind, since that would be the same as desertion. He then justified it by saying that he doesn't want to fight for a country that doesn't even treat him like a human being. He repeats that they were thrown into the meat grinder. Only 3 of 6 survived. And then she just said, "Yeah, and do you even realize that would be desertion?" He then explains that the Ukrainians gave him food, a bed, and something to drink, and that he wasn't beaten or hit, just like the Russians always claim when you get captured. She confirms that she would know the difference. He then explains that he knows it would hurt her, but he's an adult and has already made his choice. And she replies, "Who would have thought? But you do realize that would be desertion?" He said at least here he'd survive, since the Russians would just send him back to the front and he'd die there. And whether it wasn't important to her at all that she's even alive. And now comes a crucial sentence. Yes, you will get the money, But tell me, will the money really help you? Do you want a living son, or do you really just want the money? That accusation coming from his mouth really has quite an effect, to be honest. The son of a mother who should actually love her children would never feel that his mother would prefer his death over captivity so that she gets the money left behind. In any case, she responded by asking what all this had to do with the money, instead of saying that of course she wants her son to be alive. Let's clarify the situation for a moment. On one side, there's money and fame. In Russia, there's now a cult of death heroes surrounding victims of the special operation. We saw the video where mothers thank Putin that their 3 children, or their husband, or their father have died, but all for a good cause. And on the other side, there's no money, a living son, and some shame. He deserted. Her frequent mention of desertion could have other reasons. It's quite conceivable that she knows this conversation is being recorded, or could be listened to, or published, and then traced back to her. And then, of course, as a mother, you might try to distance yourself from him as much as possible, so that she doesn't get into trouble with the state in Russia if she were to approve of his actions and deeds. But in my opinion, she wasn't particularly enthusiastic even at the beginning of the conversation before he said he would desert. What do you think about it? Feel free to write it in the comments. Special thanks to the Algo Crew channel members, especially Lieutenant Colonel Renike. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, and comment. See you in the next situation report.